You want the best for your car? You already watch our tutorials.
So the best place for the best deal is to buy from the Mr. Auto app.
You will find the bulk shock absorbers used in the video exclusively on the Mr. Auto website and through the link in the description. Turn your engine off. Pull up the handbrake. Pull on the bonnet release lever and open the bonnet. To disassemble the front shock absorbers, it is first important to remove the windscreen bay and the windscreen wipers. Before removing the windscreen wipers, place adhesive tape in order to keep a precise indication of their location at the end position. This will make it possible to correctly position them when reassembling. Remove the nut covers from the wiper arms and using a ratchet and a 16-gauge socket, loosen the nuts. Remove the windscreen wiper arms by making small movements up and down. If they are not coming out, we recommend taking a windscreen wiper remove to facilitate the process. Take out the waterproofing joint on the windscreen bay by pulling it upwards from one end to the other. Remove the side covers by lifting their retaining rivets with a pry bar. Then, using a prong, remove the two retaining rivets from the windscreen bay. You can now remove the windscreen frame. You now have to remove the metallic frame. Using a flat head screwdriver, unscrew the two metal frame retaining rivets. Then, using a socket wrench, an extender, and a 10mm socket, remove the 6 holding screws on the metallic frame. Remove the metal frame. Brush the shock absorber head nut and spray it with penetrating oil. Using an 18mm offset wrench and a 6mm Allen key, unscrew the strut mount front nut by a few threads. Then, using a ratchet and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 3 screws holding the shock absorber cups by a few threads in order to create some play for the next manipulations. Loosen the stud bolts on the front wheels. You must remove the wheels in order to change the front shock absorbers on your car. This will give you full access to the suspension system. Lift the front of the vehicle. Place the vehicle on the axle stands. We strongly suggest watching our tutorial, raising your Megane 4 safely, before carrying out this step. Don't forget to slide the wheels under the vehicle. In order to change this type of shock absorber, you need to remove the hub nut. To unscrew the hub lug nut, you have to prevent the disc from rotating. Roughly screw 2 will stud bolts back on. Ask someone to press the brake pedal. With an iron bar and a 30mm socket, unscrew the hub nut without removing it. Unscrew the 2 stud bolts. You now have to remove the upper ball from the sway bar link. Stop the rotation of the ball joint with the T30 Torx screwdriver and remove the nut using the 16mm spanner. Remove the nut. Then the sway bar link. Brush the suspension ball joint retaining nut and spray it with penetrating oil next. Using two 16mm spanners, unscrew the suspension ball joint retaining screw. Finish the unscrewing process. With the help of the socket wrench. Remove the screw. You can use a pin punch and a hammer to remove it. On this vehicle, it is difficult to extract the control arm ball joint from the steering knuckle. Install a metal clamping clip on the suspension arm. Next, insert a crowbar resting on rubber buffers in order to pry and disengage the suspension ball joint from the steering knuckle. You can use the hammer to create vibrations that will facilitate removal. Remove the clip. Brush the tie rod and retaining nut and spray with penetrating oil. Using a 16mm wrench and a Torx T27 wrench, release the holding lug nut on the tie rod end. If you do not have a ball joint puller, take a hammer and hit the lug nut hard just at the end of the threading. The ball joint should move away from the pivot. Remove the brake hose retaining clip. Unclip the brake hose. Remove the ABS sensor cable. Using a Torx T30 key, unscrew the ABS sensor mounting bracket. Brush the screw of the shock absorber base and spray it with degreaser. Using a breaker bar, an 18mm socket, and an 18mm spanner, unscrew the screw on the base of the shock absorber. Then remove the screw.
Okay, guys, if we can share this video with you and help you save a lot of money, is also thanks to our partner, Mr. Auto. So, if you want to support us and buy the part for this operation, visit their website. Okay, back to work.
Finish unscrewing the hub nut. Finish unscrewing the holding nut on the tie rod end. Remove the ball joint. Position the jack to hold the hub once it has been released from the stub axle. Then use a pin punch to knock the drive shaft off the hub. Prepare a stable, elevated surface to place all of the stub axle once you have removed it. Using a hammer, strike the axle stub to release the base of the shock absorber. Next, jam the stub axle between the jack and the suspension arm. Unscrew the screws holding the suspension strut support bearing in place. Hold the shock absorber with one hand and finish unscrewing with the other. Remove the shock absorber. Sand and grease the inside of the stub axle to help facilitate the reinsertion of the shock absorber. In order to change the shock absorber, you must now separate it from the spring. You can find in the description the tool we use in the video, which we think is most adapted to the operation. Careful. Pay attention as you compress the spring. This is not without risk and should be undertaken, paying very careful attention. Install the shock absorber in the vise, then compress the two spring compressors using the socket wrench and the appropriate socket. Once the shock absorber is free in the spring, you can use a 18mm offset wrench and a 6mm Allen key to unscrew the suspension strut support bearing. In the most extreme cases, you have to use an impact wrench. Then remove the shock absorber mount, the upper spring support, the protective sleeve, the shock absorber stop. You will find the bulk shock absorbers used in the video exclusively on the Mr. Auto website and through the link in the description. Pick your new shock absorber. When changing your shock absorbers, you can also change the strut mount as well as the shock bellows and the shock stop. You can also reuse them if they are not too worn down. Push on the actuator to remove the security lock. Before installing the new shock absorbers, it is necessary to prime them by pressing the shock absorber rod vertically so that the gas and hydraulic fluid are separated. Unscrew the nut on the shock absorber head. Position the new shock absorber in the vise. Put the lower spring support back in place. Then install the spring. The shock absorber stop. The protective sleeve. The upper shock absorber support. The shock absorber mount. And finish by screwing in the lug nut onto the shock absorber stem. Make sure it is well tightened. Unscrew the spring compression tools carefully, paying attention to the position of the spring on the lower and upper shock absorber supports. You have now finished preparing the new part. Insert the shock absorber starting from the top part. Tighten the 3 suspension strut support bearing screws partway. The bottom positioning pin of the shock absorber base must be inserted into the opening of the stub axle. Insert the drive shaft into the stub axle. Thread the shock absorber base into the stub axle. Reinstall the suspension ball joint in a stub axle. Use the jack to lift the stub axle to make its insertion easier. Then reinstall the shock absorber foot screw. Retighten the nut. Remove the jack. Tap the suspension ball joint to insert it fully into the stub axle. Put the screw for the suspension ball joint in place. Screw the nut back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Tighten the nut of the shock absorber base with a Torx spanner. Using a wire brush, scrub the pivot, then apply silicone grease to the flat part that will be in contact with the tie rod bellows. Do not grease the inside of the cone. Replace the ball joint in the pivot. Put the washer in place. Tighten the nut again using a 16mm spanner and T27 Torx screwdriver. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Screw the ABS sensor cable mounting bracket back on. Clip the brake hose back in. Then lock the clip. Clip the ABS sensor hose back in. Put the sway bar link back in place. Tighten the nut using a 16mm spanner. Stop the rotation of the ball joint with the T30 Torx key. Finish tightening with a torque wrench. Then screw the hub nut back on. Ask someone to press the brake pedal. Finish tightening the hub nut with a torque wrench. You can now repeat the operation on the other side. Then you will be able to put the wheels back on your vehicle. Put your car back on the ground and block the wheels securely. During this operation, you will work on the front end of your car. An alignment check carried out by a professional will ensure that your steering system is once again perfectly adjusted and functioning. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. The final tightening of the 3 strut support bearing retaining bolts is done with the vehicle on the ground and with a Torx spanner. Finish tightening the shock absorber head nut with a torque wrench. Then put the metallic frame back in. Put the rivets back in place. Then screw the 6 screws back on. Put the windscreen bay back in place. Reinstall both rivets. Replace the side covers. Reassemble the windscreen wiper arms without exaggerating when tightening them in place. Refit the nut covers. Replace the seal. Operation completed.
Hi, it's Theo from UseTool. I hope this video has helped you a lot in your car maintenance. We would be super grateful if you could spread the word so that we can produce even more tutorials. Simply give us a like, a comment, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us boost the channel and help the whole community. Thanks a lot and have a great one.